And we'll just continue. We had the last 10 questions left, and these are going to be macro questions. So, 21. Relative weights are used in the calculation of the index of retail prices. If you remember, that was an index to calculate the inflation rate. It used to use a basket of goods which economists felt were representative of what goods or services your average household consumes. And the issue then used to rise, that was faced was, while you might be consuming a particular good, you might be buying pencils, for example, so that you should include that in the basket of goods. However, the total expenditure or the proportion of your total expenditure on pencils is very low. And expenditure on some other good might be much higher than on pencils, for example. So to take this into take this aspect into account, they introduced relative weights, where the greater the proportion of fixed income, or the proportion of total expenditure by your average household on a good, the greater the relative weight attached to the good. So this is done to reflect the different amounts of money spent by consumers on each good. Yeah, basically in a nutshell. So the different amounts of money spent by consumers on each good, amounts of money is the different. And it can also be talked about, the different amount of expenditure on by consumers on each good. So which is really what we're talking about. It doesn't take into account prices. Number of people buying the good is also not the correct term, because a lot of people might buy pencils, but that in no way takes into account the proportion of expenditure, or how much people spend on pencils, or how important pencils are to your average household. And again, it doesn't take into account prices. So that's that, 21A. So let's go on to 22. The table contains some figures from the 2014 DOP account of the United States. So you have exports of goods, BOT in goods, imports of services, balance of trade in services. And if you remember, your balance of trade, whether goods or services, or the combination of both, was export revenue minus import expenditure, right? So what cannot be concluded about the US trade in 2014 from the table? Export services were valued at over this, so it has to be greater than this. And if you look at it, we know import services, and we know the balance of trade in services was a surplus, and hence the part A is something that we can conclude that export services no doubt would have to be greater than the value of import services, that is this. So we can conclude this, so we'll cross it out because we're looking for cannot. Imported goods were valued at over जो भी ये चीज है, and were valued at over. So since the balance of trade in goods was a deficit, imported goods shouldn't be valued over it. Sorry, should they be valued? No. Yeah, my bad. So since it's export revenue minus import expenditure, and if you want a negative value at the end of the day, that is a deficit, then definitely whatever amount your export is, your import has to have a greater value. So if your export is, let's say, 1,600,000 million, then your imports need to be more than that. In this case, your imports do need to be greater than your exports to yield a negative value to get to a deficit. So yes, we can conclude this as well, that imports will be valued more than this value to get that deficit, and hence we'll cross that out as well. So C, the value of exported services was less than the value of exported goods. So if you look at exported services, we don't have it, but we can calculate it. Like, if you have your balance of trade in services, for example, you have that, and you have M, which is your imports of services. So you can just take M to the other side and add it there, and you get your balance of trade of exports. And if that's asked, if it was less than the value of exported goods, I'm going to say yes, because you know the value of exported goods, and even if you add this here, the reason for this was, again, we saw that from the formula. It should still give you. I'm just doing it mentally. It should still give you a smaller value than this one, right? So balance of trade. So the value of export services should be less than export goods, which leaves D as our answer. There was an overall current account deficit. You can't tell, right, whether or not it was an overall current account deficit, because the point here is that the current account has can be subdivided into four further components. So balance of trade in goods, balance of trade in services. I believe there are income flows, net income, and then there are transfers. So balance of trade in goods, trade in services is pretty self-explanatory. Income is basically the income you're earning from assets owned abroad, or foreigners are earning from assets owned in your country. And transfers basically linked to payments for which no good or service was provided, right? So stuff like aid, remittances, all of that type of stuff. This is different from income, because income, you have an asset abroad, and that's giving you income. The transfer is just a transfer of money. It could be done by governments, between individuals, whatever. Anyhow, so let's go to 23. A country has a fixed exchange rate, okay, as opposed to a freely floating one, it has a fixed one. What is likely to result in a deterioration in its balance of payments? Acha. A decrease in the interest rates in foreign countries. If the interest rates in foreign countries decreases, then most likely hot money should flow out from those countries. Uh, so that really shouldn't deteriorate your balance of payment, because if anything, if the interest rate of other countries is decreasing, hot money might flow out of their country into your country. That means there's an inflow into yours, and if inflow uh, for deterioration, we want outflows to be greater than inflows, right? Because that's how you move towards the deficit. So it shouldn't be this. A decrease in the country's interest rates. Yeah, it could be this though. So if your interest rates decrease here, hot money could flow out, which is basically short-term capital. So people don't want to keep their hot money here because they're getting less return on it. So this could very well, it looks like homework, but it's hot money, um, flow out. And if it flows out, that is an outflow that does help this, that outflows are greater than inflows. And because your interest well, I don't see the very clear link with exchange rate here. Definitely your exchange rate won't adjust to your adjust to have some corrective measure on the balance of payment, because normally if hot money flows out, the demand of your currency decreases, the supply of your currency decreases. There's a dual effect. Hence, your exchange rate depreciates, and that helps with export making your exports more competitive and so on, which kind of helps bring the balance of trade or balance of payment back to its equilibrium position. That doesn't happen in a fixed exchange rate system. Anyhow, so B is your answer. Let's look at other options though. So a decrease in a country's national income, uh, not really. If anything, if your national income decreases, you might end up spending less on stuff like imports and so on. So that might actually help your balance of payment. Um, Output and all would go down, but you can't really say for sure in this case. An increase in the income of foreign countries. Um, okay, I think I misquoted C. We were talking about deterioration. So in C, if the national income of your country decreases, then yes, you might be spending less on stuff like imports because national income decreases. But as I said before, output could have decreased, and all of that type of stuff, right? So if you're moving towards, decrease in national income usually leads to recessionary forces. So if all of that stuff is happening, then again, your balance of payment might improve, might deteriorate. We can't really be sure. because really depends on then your elasticity of your exports, whether or not output in the export industry is increasing, decreasing. Can't really tell much from here. So in D, in an increase in the income of foreign countries. So if foreign countries are richer, they might buy more of your products now. So that might actually help your balance of payment rather than deteriorating it. So the option that we can be sure about is definitely D. So let's stick with that. Go to 24. At present, one unit of a country's currency exchanges for US 1.2 मतलब. So this is the currency, जो भी country की currency है, I don't know कौन सी currency है, and that is worth $1.2, right? The country aims to set its exchange rate equal to 1. So इससे ये 1 करना है. And if you really look at it, that means that the country's currency is now worth less in terms of USD. Like if you look at it, it was first, like first your, let's say 1 rupee was worth 1.2 USD. I wish, but now 1 rupee is only worth 1 USD. So the country's currency is depreciating. It's the exchange rate. I mean, it's depreciating relative to USD at least. So its exchange rate is decreasing, and that could happen either by decreasing the demand of your currency, either increasing the supply of your currency, so that your exchange rate value goes down, or alternatively, because it's just relative to one other currency, you could either increase the demand of the USD, of US dollars. You either increase the demand of US dollars or decrease supply of US dollars, but you probably can't manipulate supply on their behalf. But anyhow, right? So the idea here is, because your depreciation or is relative to what's happening to the other currency. So either if the exchange rate is decreasing, either your currency is depreciating or their currency is appreciating. Has the same effect. Anyhow, exchange rate needs to decrease. What combination of government actions in the foreign exchange market must, okay, not no chances, must achieve this aim? Buying US currency and buying its own currency, no. If you buy US currency, the demand for US currency would increase, which is good because that would appreciate the US currency, which is what we want. We want ours to depreciate and theirs to appreciate. So we're buying our own currency, which would increase the demand of our own currency, and we don't want that, right? Well, because then we can't be sure that वो must वाली बात नहीं आती. Maybe it can depreciate, maybe not, depending on which action is greater. If because if because we want to depreciate our own currency, but we want to appreciate the US currency. So maybe if this action is greater than this, the depreciation will happen. But if this action is greater than this, it won't. So because the question specifically says must, this would be wrong. This answer would be wrong. So part B, buying US currency and selling its own currency. So if you buy US currency, you're increasing the demand of that, which is good because that helps the US currency appreciate. If you're selling your own currency, you're increasing the supply of your currency, which is good because it helps your currency depreciate. Overall, your exchange rate decreases. So that's definitely B. Let's just look at other options anyways. So if you sell US currency, that's not on, because if you sell US currency, you're just going to depreciate the US dollar, which you don't want, and you're buying your own currency, which is just going to appreciate your dollar, your currency, which you don't want. That will in fact definitely increase your exchange rate, which is not what's happening. If you sell US currency and you're selling your own currency, again, you might be depreciating your currency, but you're depreciating the US currency as well. So you can't really tell, right? Um, so that can't be it. So it's 24B for sure. The table gives terms of trade index in 2010 and 2013. And if you remember terms of trade, TOT, a lot of people get worried by this. It's just another way to express export price and upon export price and import price. So it's export price over import price. That's it, just a ratio, and you multiply it by 100. Okay, so in 2000 they were 100. अच्छा, and 2010 में ये थे, 2013 में ये हैं. So you can naturally tell that Venezuela's export price is greater than its import price. The reason for that is because you just look at the formula again. If the numerator has to be greater than the denominator to get a value above 100. Here it's the other way around. The import price is greater than the export price, and the logic behind that is again just mathematical. If the denominator is greater than the numerator, you get a value less than 100 because you're multiplying it by, right? So, okay, so which combination of statements is a correct interpretation of the changes between 2010 and 2013? Can buy more imports per unit of exports. So it's saying for one export you can buy more imports. मतलब अगर हम you if you give up one export अभी आप if you give up one export उसके तो for because of that you can buy a lot of imports. So I think that means that your terms of trade should increase so that export price is more compared to import price. So that just giving up one export gets you more imports. So that would be Venezuela. Import prices have risen faster than export prices. Well, this clearly means that your TOT has gone down because if your denominator increases faster than your numerator, TOT has gone down. This is only the case in Japan. So that should be C. I'm not too comfortable with this question, but just to check right away, 25C. Yeah, we're good. Okay. And well, let's move on to 26. The U.S. president signed a trade agreement which allowed more duty-free, so tax-free access. No, like you're basically reducing trade barriers when you talk about duty-free. Allowed more duty-free access to the U.S. market for Latin America and the Caribbean countries, who might benefit in the short run from this agreement. Caribbean countries because they may export to Latin America. Not really, because the trade agreement that we're talking about only stipulates that duty-free access, more of that to the US has happened. So if you export to Latin America, it doesn't really affect you, right? Latin American businesses because they may be able to sell more in the US. Yeah, that could be true because now whatever you're exporting to the US, they whatever you're exporting to the US, there are less trade barriers, there are less tariffs and stuff like that. Um, so Latin American governments, because they will not have to pay so much duty. Well, not really. The government itself um, might. Well, it's a bit weird. Like governments themselves don't necessarily export; their firms do. Let's just hold on to this for a second. The US, because it may export more to Latin America. Well, this is for sure wrong because the only thing the trade agreement has talked about is increasing access to US markets for these countries. It doesn't say that it goes the other way around as well. So the US may have reduced its tariffs and stuff like that. It's not necessarily that these countries would reciprocate. So D is wrong for sure. Um, Well, and I guess your answer would be B because that's the one that makes most sense. So Latin American businesses, because they may be able to sell more in the US. Why are they able to sell more? Because now their products are more competitive in the US, right? Because they don't have to pay tariff and all. Tariff is just like an indirect tax. It increases your cost of production and hence your price. So now they're more price competitive, so they can sell more. Um, the part C is just a little weird, right? Latin American governments, because they will not have to pay so much duty, makes it sound more like a jizya tax rather than um, yeah. Um, so if I mean if Part C had been more of the Latin American government, because since firms can export easily because of the reduction in trade barriers, that might help the balance of payments. Stuff like that could make sense, but The way it's phrased, definitely not. It would be B. So let's go to 27. Which statement is not a valid reason why a country may impose protectionist measures? So we'll just quickly go through these, and we'll cross out all of the valid reasons for the imposition of protectionist measures. They're basically just increasing trade barriers, more stuff like yeah, so more stuff like tariffs and increased trade barriers, quotas, all of that. So let's just cross out all the valid reasons and we'd be left with our answer. To allow a newly developed industry to grow to a viable size, that is a valid reason. You would want this is the infant industry argument, infant or sunrise industry argument, which might not have fully developed its comparative advantage, but can if you allow it to grow at the very least without those crushing large firms in the international market. Because obviously, because they're producing at a much larger scale, they benefit from economies of scale, can enjoy lower costs, and hence can sell at a price which these small firms might not be able to. This newly developed industry, so it needs some sort of protection in the short run at the very least. To enable a country to retain control of an industry it regards as of being strategic importance, this is a valid argument. By strategic importance, we means like something that could strategically help. So defense, anything producing arms and ammunition, stuff like that. It might not necessarily be efficient. It might be driven out of the industry if you just allow free trade to happen. But you wouldn't want that for strategic reasons because you want to be prepared in case of war, etc., etc. To give consumers a wider choice of goods and services? Well, this is your answer because protectionism reduces choice, especially with consumers of goods and services. Because if you have protectionist measures in place, less firms are going to export to your country. Even if they do, those products will be just more available at a higher price. And D is to give time for workers in a declining domestic industry to find alternative employment. That is also a valid argument. It's the sunset or is a sunset industry argument. So your answer would be C. Our government wants to operate a tighter monetary policy. So here this would uh, indicate a tighter monetary policy indicates a more restrained monetary policy, a more contractionary monetary policy. So, and a contractionary monetary policy, contract, I'll just write contract. Uh, Basically, a contractionary monetary policy makes use of interest rates or money supply in such a way that AD goes down. So, well, budget surplus and rates of taxation are just fiscal policy. Just cut them right away. Um, it wants to reduce AD, so it would, and if you remember, so to reduce AD, it either has to increase interest rates, and since it's a negative relation, you could either decrease money supply, either one of the two, right? The reason is because of increased interest rates, people will save more, so consumption goes down, and it's more costly to borrow and invest, so investment go down. So what would it increase? What would it increase are your interest rates. So 28B. A country has a large current account deficit. Its government decides to devalue its currency. Okay. And just before I go on, the difference between depreciation and devaluation is devaluation normally happens in your fixed exchange rate system, where the government does it. Depreciation is you do to the freely floating forces of demand and supply. But in both cases, what basically happens is your exchange rate goes down. In what circumstances would such a measure reduce the deficit? Okay, if you remember the Marshall-Lerner condition, so the Marshall-Lerner condition, it stated that the elasticity of exports and imports, if you add that, so let's talk about the PED of exports plus the PED of imports if that was greater than 1, meaning these were either elastic or to the more elastic end of the inelastic spectrum. Basically, they were not highly inelastic, they were more of elastic types. Stupid cat. But yeah, so if they're going to be more elastic, or if they're this if you add their elasticities and that is greater than 1, again we'll be ignoring the negative sign here. So in those cases, depreciation or devaluation is fruitful and the deficit should reduce, eventually should go to a surplus. Well, okay, let's just leave good handwriting and proper spelling. So PED for exports and imports, whatever value gives you greater than 1, not this. This gives you 0.5. This gives you 1. It's in greater than 1. It would be D, which is greater than 1. It's about reduced deficit, yeah. So 30, the diagram shows 4 possible aggregate supply curves and an equilibrium point X. Oh, there's a lot of aggregate supply curves. In fact, might not circle that. It's already messy enough. A government employs a deflationary fiscal policy, so a contractionary fiscal policy. AD should decrease. And we can see that it does from AD1 to AD2. In order to reduce the rate of inflation in its economy, this shifts AD to AD2. With which AS curve would this policy be least effective? Meaning, with the idea of least effective is that the price level doesn't change as much, which would really be D. Because if you look at D, it goes, it goes, it goes, it goes here. So this was your original equilibrium at price level P, and even though you decrease aggregate demand, the price level is still the same. So the rate of inflation really hasn't gone anywhere. जितना inflation पहले था उतनी ही inflation अभी होगी. Only thing you've done is that you've reduced national income, so no real use there. The one that would be most beneficial, most effective, although that's not required, but most effective would be with this, with A, because इधर सबसे ज़्यादा फर्क आता है प्राइस में. इधर आप देखो, the other one, ये कुछ में इधर इतना आता, कुछ में इतना आता, but with D तो बिल्कुल भी नहीं आ रहा है. So your answer would be D. I'll just quickly check my answers before I conclude this video. So 21 A, D, we have B, 25 C, 26 B, 27 C, 28 B, 29 D, 30 D. So all in all, pretty good. In fact, we didn't mess up any questions this time at least. So that was it. I tried my best to go as slow as possible and try to explain stuff in as just explain stuff as much as I could. Reason being, because if you're already comfortable with content and you can do MCQ past papers by yourself, then why don't you go? Then just go ahead with that. If you struggle, however, then this might help you more. So that's it from my end for today.